Good morning, all. Um, it's good to have you in this room. We're going to be talking about on the topic of spatial justice today. Spatial justice in the city and in conjunction or relation to housing development. But before we proceed, I just want to ask if I'm clearly audible from the technical team. Is all okay? Thank you. All right, I want to also welcome my co-host, Nompumelelo Zuma, to the room. And you're going to be, engaging with a very, very important topic of spatial justice in the city, especially looking at what's going on around the world, globally, also in the global south and in South African cities. So we need to be quite quick today because we're running behind time and there are other commitments for various speakers, and we want to finish on time as per the program. So before we get to the focus of the discussion and the topic, just some rules, house rules. I think, to make things more efficient, if you have questions, what you should do is you should actually type those questions in the chat. That will make it much easier to deal with, because we're not going to have much time. Each presentation is 20 minutes and the speakers will keep to that. And from there, we will have a few minutes for questions and answers, and we'll have to move on to the next speaker. So back to spatial justice in the city. And what this topic is dealing with is about how does difference be factored into the city? Because looking at what's going on, there are various exclusions in terms of rights to the city, access to the city, and spatial justice. So we're dealing with a problem of spatial injustice, largely. And there are various ways in which this manifests. There are gender issues, race issues, ethnicity, and other factors including territorialism, barriers, exclusion, and much of those kinds of unwanted ills that really stifle the livability and access to the city. What happens is we end up with spatial segregation within cities, and it actually compromises spatial transformation, but also experience of the city itself. Now, the papers will be looking at some interesting topics, but they also start to question, what's predominant literature in spatial justice. If we look at Henri Lefebvre, David Harvey, and Edward Sawyer, and from there, we're going to look at those lenses, a critique of them, but also how scholars are currently engaging with this issue of spatial justice in various parts of the world. So if you had a look at the program, there are very interesting topics that deal with refugees and immigrants, which is a critical population that is excluded from many cities. We're looking at aspects of this African smart city, or the smart, inclusive smart city, which was just something that was discussed in the plenary before this. Then we're going to look at how the waste to wealth transformation happens, and how does that influence access to the cities. And then of actual parking facilities along selected major traffic routes. So these all deal with questions of inclusion and exclusion, and the presenters here are really going to, I'm looking forward to your presentations, and I'll need my co-host to assist me because we'll have to check whether the first presenter is available, and that is Olugwabemi Alalade.
Thank you, Chair. Just trying to see amongst the members that are in the group, just double checking if he's in, but I'm not seeing his name on the list.
Yeah, I also cannot see. Thanks for that, Nompu. Okay. Can we move to Edmo Mutsa? Edmo, are you ready? I can introduce your topic if you're ready.
Yes, Doc, I'm ready, but there's been a change of topic.
Okay.
So I'm going to present a different topic. We couldn't change on the program because it was already out.
Okay, go ahead, Doc. You can continue. You introduce your topic then, and we're really looking forward to it, presenting. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Doc. Okay, can you all see my slides?
We can see the program, Doc.
Okay, so I think let me stop sharing and then okay.
You can now see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. All right, so I'm going to present on inclusive urban safety. As I mentioned, that I was supposed to present on smart cities, but since it was an ongoing project, then I couldn't actually present on it because we haven't finalized. But I'm going to present on this research, which is actually which you actually did, and it was finalized. So this is basically on inclusive urban safety. And this is a research which was done in 6 secondary cities in SA. So as you know, recently, currently we have 67% of the population of South African population, which is actually living in urban areas. And with a growth rate of 2%, it is expected to be 71% of urban population in 2030, and reaching up to 80% by 2050. So with this rapid urbanization, it is believed that it's linked to economic and social development. Yet this development actually undermined by the deterioration of safety and security across our cities. And as a consequence, this put the inhabitants in danger. The most affected people or most affected population groups are women. Hence, we focused on women in this research. So, according to the United Nations Habitats in Sustainable Development Goal number 11, making cities safe and sustainable means ensuring access to safe and affordable public space for all. This is also echoed in the National Development Vision 2030, and in line with the Vision 2030, the Integrated Urban Development Framework presents urban safety as a cross-cutting issue for urban development and governance. The Integrated Urban Development Framework highlights the urban concentration of violence and crime in South Africa. This is not to say there's no violence and crime in rural areas, but it's actually more prevalent in our cities. So it acknowledges that fact. Therefore, there is a need for urban approach to make cities and the country at large safer. Safety and security, it also emphasized that safety and security are essential ingredients for creating livable and prosperous cities. So if planned and managed well, cities can offer inhabitants access to more diverse livelihood, improved basic infrastructure and services, better health and education, as well as many other social and cultural benefits. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this was a study which was done in 6 different cities, which are secondary cities, as you can see on the map which is presented or projected on your screen. There's the city of Motlasane, which is Klerksdorp, and then the city of Mfuleni, which is also known as the Vernaching. And then we have the city of George in Western Cape. We have the city of Polokwane, or formerly known as Pietersburg. We also have the city of Mhlatuze, also known as Richards Bay. We also have the city of Emalahleni, formerly known as Witbank. All right, so the methodology which we took was actually a qualitative methodology, where we were using a guide with indicators of what we would assume are elements of a safer city, or elements which can actually improve safety or enhance safety and security within a particular city. So this includes street lightening, or street illumination, signage, pedestrian footpath, easiness of navigation, police visibility, among other indicators. So one would want to ask, why women and why urban safety? So while safety of all communities, both urban and rural, matters equally, but more emphasis should actually be put on cities, considering that 67% of the urban of the population is actually staying in cities, and 27% to 28% of the national population is living in what we call secondary cities or intermediate cities. So this warrants a special emphasis on cities, because the majority of people actually living in these cities, and 85% of economic activity is actually generated in cities. So that's why we are focusing on that's why we focused on cities. And the reason why we focus on women, this is actually try to raise the bar of safety, because according to the National Development Plan, Vision 2030, by 2030, people living in South Africa should have no fear of crime. Women, children are those who are vulnerable. Women, children, and those who are vulnerable should feel protected. So women actually classified under the most vulnerable population groups in our cities. So that is why we focused on women in this study. So the idea being that if we are able to provide safety from the planning point of view, if we're able to provide safety to women, everyone else who is less vulnerable is also covered in that. So that's what I mean by saying raising the bar of safety in our cities. So lack of safety in urban areas directly affect the economic and social development prospects of inhabitants, not only of cities, but also the country as a whole, especially for women among other vulnerable groups. So the graphs you are seeing on your left, they're actually showing the population share between cities and the rest of the country, and also between metros and also the secondary cities or intermediate cities, which we were focusing on. And also the proportion of women to men As you know, the women actually, are the majority as far as population dynamics is concerned. They actually form the majority part of our population. So in defining security, according to UN Habitat, security is defined as the statistical risk to be exposed to danger, and this can actually affect human behavior. It affects where you can go in the city. It affects where you would want to stay, where would you want to do business. So it affects human behavior, whether there's a secure or lack thereof security. Safety is one concept that varies depending on the context in which research is presented. Subjective safety reflects perception of social safety and encompasses fear or anxiety caused by presumed fear or real fear. Safety in urban context can be thought of as physical protection, but can be thought of in a wider sense, speaking of the ability of people to make choices necessary for their own well-being, while taking into consideration the gender-responsive approach, which is recognizing the need of women and also the women and girls and also men and boys. When looked at from this perspective, safety is everything. Safety and security has everything to do with the inclusive urban development. So, considering the complexity of safety in the country or in our cities, and the effects on our progressive in every other aspect, and the interconnected and holistic response which must be explored. This study explored the safety of women and lack thereof in the 6 cities which I presented in the introduction section. So the findings, what we found in this research was an inconsistent, that these 6 cities consistently underscore safety challenge that not only render inhabitants unsafe, but also compromise their equitable access to essential services and economic participation in the cities which they actually call home. Though the degree of this of safety or lack thereof differ from city to city and also from one part of the city to another. So as indicators, we were looking at street lighting. This is this refers to the illumination of roads for the primary purpose of improving safety and movement. So the images you see on your right side, those were taken from actually different cities. The one on top, it was actually taken from the city of George in Western Cape. As you can see, there's actually better illumination in that image. It was taken on a rainy day, but you can actually see. And in contrast, you can see other cities that there's actually poor illumination, poor street lighting in that, and then that actually increased the risk of, the risk of safety in these other cities. The one to your right side of image number 2 was taken from Klerksdorp, which is the city of Motlasane, and then image number 3 was taken from Polokwane, and there's also poor illumination, and image number 4 was taken from the city of Mfulen. So you can see the contrast between those, and what we found out is that there's actually a connection between poor illumination, street illumination, with safety, which means people had a feeling of unsafe in these cities with poor illumination. This also evidenced by a few people who are actually in the streets during the day. This is problematic in a time where we're actually trying to encourage concept like 24-hour cities, because we are facing high employment rate. So there are concepts which actually coming up, try to improve, to develop the economy as well as to reduce the rate of unemployment by creating a night economy. But it is impossible when it's unsafe to do so, or when it's unsafe for people to be in the city during dark hours. So that actually compromise the success of such initiative. We also looked at the issues of signage. This can be traced back to the concept of urban space, according to Kevin Lynch. So signage is actually the way in which cities communicate to its inhabitants and also visitors. So what we found out is that there was also inconsistency between different cities and between different parts of a particular city as far as signage is concerned. So the image you see on the top was actually taken from the city of George. That is actually the only city where you can actually find pedestrian maps. These are maps which can actually assist you to navigate across the cities. In case you are a visitor, you won't really get lost in these cities because there are these maps to actually assist you. So what we find out is that it's only the city of George which actually had such maps, and also their signages were also better off. So it's actually more safe to navigate that city. If you are not quite familiar with the city, you end up asking the wrong people, and then you end up being in trouble if the people have actually bad intentions. So that's where the issue of safety comes into play. And also this is how pedestrians and motorists also communicate with the city or to each other. So what we found that with lack of signages, there was actually a risk. There was actually a risk. So another indicator or a standard which we looked at was actually footpath. So walking is actually an integral part of our ability and sustainability of our cities, and therefore it should gain its place as safe and convenient and pleasant way of actually. So at some point, at every point during the day, you actually find that all of us actually pedestrians. Whether in the beginning of the day, if you're going to use a car, you're going to be a pedestrian, and at the end of the day or at the end of your destination, you are going to be a pedestrian again. So it's actually very important to make sure that our streets are actually safe, and they actually have footpath, which makes it actually safe for people to navigate or to move across the city, without fearing actually accidents. And according to research, approximately 35 to 40% of road accidents in SA actually pedestrian death because of lack of footpath. So as you can see on the other side, this is actually the conditions of the footpaths which we see. There was also inconsistency, as you can see. So what therefore happened in other cities, you find that there are a lot of obstructions due to street vending. There was also issues of obstruction due to developments which are going on in the cities, and also in other areas. The footpaths were actually in derelict condition. In other areas, they were actually in good condition. Okay, so in areas where they're actually in bad condition or there was obstruction, you'd find a trend in which people are actually moving away from the footpath and actually going on the main street, risking their lives, because actually some of the streets actually very busy. And what we noticed that is actually women, especially month-end, who are actually dominating, these streets due to the role which they play in our everyday lives. Either they're going for groceries, or they're taking children to school, or they're moving with the elderly. So they have more trip chaining, so that put most of them actually at risk. So there's actually a need for improvement where the conditions are not good. This also goes with the with the street crossing. This tie in the issue of footpaths as well as signages. So in most cities we didn't actually find safer pedestrian crossing or foot bridges. And what we found was actually zebra crossings, which was actually good. In some instances, they were actually not legible, and putting cities at risk. So pedestrian footbridge actually reduce the risk of safety. As I said, women have more trip chaining, in our cities due to the role which they occupy in our everyday, life. So we also looked at the issues of crime in our urban spaces. So by crime, I actually mean, the filthiness or dirtiness of urban spaces. This has been, crime has a negative impact, or it has been connected to negative impact on property value. And these changes in urban spaces with property value decreasing, there are changes in urban spaces which are sometimes characterized by a pattern of deterioration, where resident-based control of street life gives way to disorderly social and physical conditions known as incivility. So physical incivilities, these include abandoned buildings, graffitis, litter, vacant and trash-filled lots, and unkempt yards. Under social incivilities, we looked at the issue of public drinking, drunkenness, rowdy and unsupervised teen groups, sexual harassment on the streets, open prostitution or sex work, and public drug sale and use. So this falls under social incivility, and there is a connection between these incivilities and crime, residents' fear and further erosion of urban fabric. And in most of these, women actually bear the heaviest brand of such incivilities. So we found a connection between the areas which actually rendered unsafe and these incivilities, also connection between crime and these incivilities. And when we look at issues, we also looked at the issue of emergency help, convenience, and informal surveillance and policing and mugging. Informal surveillance is actually, the amount of people who actually on the streets at a particular time of the day. And what we found out that there's actually adequate amount of people in these cities. Actually, adequate amount of people in these cities, and also the availability of glass facade, either for stores or offices, also provide this informal surveillance where they can watch out for each other during the day, and actually reduce the safety risks. We also looked at issues of public funds. And most of the cities we found none, maybe due to the reason that people nowadays actually using phones, cell phones, or mobile phones. And there were in some areas, depending on which area you were, there was there's inconsistency in actually police visibility. Police visibility actually improve security or the feeling of of safety. actually improve that. So what we found is that in the downtown areas of most of these cities, there was actually less security in those areas as compared to the upmarket and maybe the CPD. So we also conducted opinion polls, and this indicated that in areas where there's less police patrol and formal surveillance, and at night, muggers sometimes banish weapons and merely threaten and harm, especially women, and usually steal money, jewelry, and etc. Okay, so in conclusion, the general findings was that across these cities, certain parameters were better than other, depending where and when you are in the city. It is relatively safer, as I mentioned, in the upmarket area of most of these cities, and the infrastructure is actually better in those areas as compared to the CBD and the downtown areas. So as a recommendation, there's need for more efficient and evidence-based intervention at local level to strengthen resilience and improve safety of communities. Through effective planning and engineering, cities are able to make roads safe for pedestrians, particularly women, as they actually form the most vulnerable population groups of our communities. There's also need to recognize that safety is is a fundamental right of living in a city, and that while a multitude of actors and sectors have responsibility to create safer communities, ultimately the state's responsibility is to guarantee the right of all inhabitants to be safe. There's also need for improved police visibility, institutionalization of gender mainstreaming and gender equity in urban safety. This also emphasized in the National Development Plan Vision 2030 and crime prevention strategy. It requires actually more traction. And women and girls must systematically be involved in the diagnosis of safety of the city from intersectional approach. Significant to succeed against the challenges of implementation will be to take an overarching approach to women's safety issues rather than a featured one, and for cities to work with women rather than to seek to direct them. Also, local municipalities should undertake a regular safety audit as well. This also can actually feed into the understanding of their safety, the state of safety in the cities. And lastly, cities must be held accountable for adopting gender perspective, in their safety policies and plan. So this is actually the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you for that interesting presentation. I didn't notice any questions or comments in the chat, so I'm not sure if anybody wants to post anything as yet, but I just want to raise a few issues. Not issues, but comments and questions. So the first comment is that you showed how actually safety in cities, and we're all familiar with this, is actually a barrier to access. Yes. So while we talk about spatial justice and right to the city, if issues of safety in the various forms that you present are not addressed, then we're just theorizing and dreaming about safe cities, right? So it's about implementation and the strategies, and I wanted to know a little bit more about that, because in a lot of the South African cities as well, the issue of safety leads to urban decay and loss of vitality in the city itself, right? So when you're looking at Lynch's legibility of the city, you focused on signage and things, and then it came to mind about would that also not exclude the visually impaired people in navigating the city? Now, you don't have to answer the question now, but that's something to consider. And I'm not sure if your research picked up what are the strategies in different cities as precedent to actually address visually impaired, persons. The other was on the issue of the street and who dominates the street, and it seems that vehicles continue to exclude people. So, for example, when we are talking about the vendors encroaching onto the footpaths, and then what goes beyond the footpath? The footpath then encroaching onto the street, and it questions: is the street for vehicles, or is the street for people? And how are we changing attitudes to the street as well? And what are the strategies to overcome that, rather than the easy alternative of actually stopping vendors from trading, because that's also going to lead to spatial injustice and lack of access to the city, right? So I just wanted you to comment on those two things very briefly, because we're beyond time now, if you can do that. Thanks, Doc.
Okay, Doc. So the issue of excluding visually impaired people, actually, I might not have actually mentioned it, but we looked into it. As you see on the second point there, there's a network of tactile street signages. So these are actually signages which are related to actually the sense of touch, which actually caters for the visually impaired people. So what we found out is that, there's no such in all of the cities, actually. There's no such. So in that sense, there's actually more work to be done in that regard. So that point, actually, we looked into it. The second question was on what? Or the second comment was on, if you can come again.
The second one was on, vendors, informal vendors encroaching on the paths and how vehicles may be excluding people from streets.
Yes. Okay. So actually, it's a very tricky situation, because we're actually at a point in which we actually try to include as much people into the economy. That is to say, the informal economy is actually an integral part of the economy. But then now they occupy this footpath, which is actually designed for people to actually walk in, and now it's a different. They're actually used for a different use. So it is actually difficult, because once it's actually once there's obstruction like that, it's actually pushing people in the streets, which actually is supposed to be for motorists, and actually pushing people, which actually putting people at risk. As we noted that 30 to 45% of accidents actually pedestrian, and they would have such if they're actually walking on the footpath, but then now they can't, because it's occupied by informal economic activities, which is street vending. So there's actually more need for that, and actually policies to be developed, and law enforcement, or if there are policies, actually they need to actually be implemented to make sure that informal economy or street vending is actually regulated. It doesn't infringe in other land uses.
Doc, so I'm going to respond to that as a comment, but not as a question. I think it'll help the research on urban inclusivity as well, inclusive cities.
Yes,
because if you look at the considerations when, I'm an architect, so speaking from this point of view, if you look at what was considered at the time, the building edge, the pavement, and the street, which we'll call road now, was designed. What was the consideration? Because the socioeconomic reality at the time was different, right? So it raises a question that can make your work, and we could say our work here in this group, much more deep, because it questions how do we design for change, how do we factor in indeterminacy? How do we design for future possibilities? And if in South Africa, for example, there was kind of paradigmic changes in socioeconomic realities. Now, then you have the question of policing and regulating and regulating the vendors, or the other option would be to relook at how the relationship between building, pavement, and street can be reorganized so that it can become more inclusive and respond to the reality of the socioeconomic circumstances of now. And then considering how this will, change in future. I think your work has just raised a very important issue about how do we design for the evolution of the cities. Now, I'm speaking from a design point of view. So thank you, Doc. I think your presentation, what's nice about it, it starts to raise these questions, which you don't have to sit and answer now, but it's provoking these things, which makes it very interesting work. So I thank you for this, and I think we'll move on to the next presentation now. So thanks, Doc.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So the next presenter on the program, we'll just follow the program as it is, Ms. Husseini Khair. And it's two authors, but I think it's Ms. Husseini Khair Husseini that's going to present, and the authors herself and Ahmed Mohammed Emigliati. They're from the Federal University of Technology, Minna, Nigeria, and they're situated in the Department of Geography. And the topic is Potential of Waste to Wealth Initiative in Minna Metropolis, Nigeria. And this is a very, very important, area of research here in South Africa as well. So we're really interested in looking at what you present and how you're engaging with this problem, and hopefully to learn from it. So over to you, Khair. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody can hear me, please.
We can. Good morning. If you can just increase the size, perfect, of your screen. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Khair Husseini, and the topic for my presentation today is Potentials of Waste to Wealth Initiative in Minna Metropolis, Nigeria. So improper waste disposal presents a lot of challenges to the inhabitants of an environment and the environment as a whole. And therefore, it is a global it is an issue every ways to efficiently has be an effective method of reducing the amount of waste in circulation, and therefore reducing the impact that it has on the environment, because it deals with classification of waste, sorting of waste, reduction and reuse of waste products, and remodifying them into valuable products. So for the purpose of this research, waste was the predominantly what causes it is any waste that is discarded in dry form, be it residential, commercial, agricultural, any form. As long as it is dry, then it is solid waste. And the increase in population in Nigeria has actually led to an increase in production of waste, because more activities and more use of materials means more generation of solid waste. And it is a problem in Minna Metropolis, just as it is in other developing towns. In Minna, toxic waste and non-toxic waste are all dumped on the same site. There is no segregation of waste, there is no separation of waste, and this has impacts, it has effects on the health of the people. You would still see indiscriminate dumping of waste on river channels, on streets, on parkways. The government is not at all involved. Government and the state government and its agencies are not at all involved in recycling. Therefore, there is no availability of facilities to transform these wastes into useful products. There is no awareness campaigns or programs or any form of education for the people. These are all issues, but lack of data is also an issue because you don't even know, the residents do not even know the types of waste that are being sought after, the ones that have the most potentials, what potentials they have, where you can source them from, and where they're being taken to. So because the potentials are not being studied in MENA, this study actually seeks to identify various types of waste, solid waste, their sources, destinations, and their potentials for waste creation and a sustainable environment in MENA. So MENA Metropolis is the state capital of Niger State, one of the 36 states of Nigeria, and it is located in the north central part of the country. And it has a population of about 463,000 people, with majority, about 54% being males and 46% being females. So for the purpose of this study, 7 locations in MENA were studied because these are places that scavenging is very predominant, is very visible. Scavenging is just the process of waste picking. You see a lot of the residents or those involved in waste dealing actually just collecting waste from various sources. And these are areas that have waste all over the streets and on river channels. So they were the perfect locations to get certain data necessary for carrying out this study. These places include Boso Locust, Boso Estate, Keterangwari, Kasongwari, Kuri Market, Tunga, and Maitumbi. So questionnaires were administered to about 250 scavengers so that we know the types that are required, the sources, the destinations, where do they take them to after they source them. And then oral interviews were also conducted with waste fabricators because they actually have experience with people that recycle outside of the state, and they also deal with small-scale recycling within the metropolis. So results from questionnaire survey actually indicate various types of recyclables that are desirable, types of solid waste that are desirable in MENA metropolis or by other people that are generated in MENA metropolis. So these include aluminum scraps, glass, paper and carton, plastic and bottles, tin and metal scraps, tires, tubes, batteries, charcoal, wood shavings, sawdust, leather, and shoe soles. These are the most desirable based on what scavengers collect. So collectors or scavengers, as you would waste from either households, as 22% of them get it from households, 12% just pick out from landfills and dump sites. Others go to waste bins of restaurants, or they buy from the restaurants and institutions as well, like schools, markets, offices, shops, and majority of them just pick wherever they can find. So you just see them indiscriminately just picking waste on dump sites everywhere, around houses, everywhere. So they just pick up these wastes. After picking waste from various sources, they actually transport them to 3 main areas. in MENA. They either take it to the Scrap Dealers Association, as 57.6% of them take to the Scrap Dealers Association, which is a majority. And the Scrap Dealers Association is just a waste dealing association. The main waste dealing association in MENA Metropolis. They deal with collection of various kinds of solid waste, be it automobile parts or paper, any type of solid waste. And what they do is after collection, they just sell to recycling companies outside of the metropolis. They come to them and buy in large volumes. So apart from that, scavengers also take to junk shops or middlemen. So these are just shops that are opened by individuals and being operated by individuals. They just buy these wastes and make sure they accumulate them to a certain quantity and then sell. They sell to either waste dealers within the town or sell to recyclers or recycling companies outside of the town or the state. And then a few, about 5.2%, actually sell their waste to fabricators, or welders, blacksmiths, artisans, anybody that needs a few parts of the solid waste in order to carry out their various businesses. But ultimately, what happens is after scavengers get their waste, they take it to these 3 places, and majority of actually go up of awareness of what to do within the town. It means that only about 5.2% of whatever waste is being generated is recycled within MENA. Every other thing goes out. Places like Kano, Aba, lakeling plants, and flowchart sources. Scavengers get it from various sources. Middlemen get from scavengers. Waste dealers within town get from middlemen. And then the final destination is recycling companies conducted with the waste fabricators and artisans. They show a few uses to which recyclable materials can be put based on their own small scale recycling within town, and then based on their experiences with recyclers outside of the metropolis. So metal scraps can be used for cutlasses and hoes. You can get rubber slippers, cups, plates, chairs from plastic. You can cook, heat, and make beddings for birds with wood sheet sawdust. Batteries, then used for soft drink bottling, peanut bottling, mirrors. Aluminium scraps can be used for making jewelry and cat wall boards, roof cover boards, and floor underlays. So these are just a few of the uses that recyclables can be put to and what they're being used for in MENA metropolis. So to conclude this, I would say recycling actually is mainly operated by the private sector in MENA. That is how it is. Government agencies, the solid waste or the waste management agencies, have no input at all. The state government is not responsible for recycling at all. They just get the waste and take it to a site where they can just burn it, but they don't actually think of recycling it. So individuals decide to take part in informal recycling. And we can see that there are actually various types of waste that are generated within the town that have various uses. And they're being sourced from various places, from us, from we the residents that actually use these things. And the waste are just collected because of lack of awareness. They're just being collected and sold to companies up. These places are actually have money from recycling, give it to them. And there are a lot of challenges that informal recyclers face, like difficulty in transporting accumulated waste. You could see these waste pickers just with sacks or with wheel trucks or carts, just transporting over long distances, taking waste over long distances, and that actually reduces the level of output that can be realized from that, or the effectiveness or efficiency that will be realized from that. Now, government can actually come in and intervene in such a way that they could empower their agents to actually manage solid waste in a way that's policy, and or they could actually just partner or collaborate with individuals that individuals or waste dealing companies there that are already part of the recycling processes within town, and then expand on what they have for better output. So we could have, based on that, we could have enlightenment and public awareness programs where the residents actually know the benefits of these recyclables. They're actually sitting on wealth. Instead of them to discard it, they know the various types of waste. They know how they can put it to good use instead of just discarding it. Then we can introduce curbside collection, where you have separate collection bins for collection of waste, where you put clean recyclables in one collection point, and then the rest of the garbage in another. So they're collected in different vehicles, and the recyclables are being taken to a recycling point while the rest of the garbage are being taken elsewhere. You could have drop-off centers around parks or on the streets, around parks or in the parking lots, where you could actually have people come and drop off waste, so they know where to take recyclables. They just don't dump it anywhere around town. They take them to for useful purposes. You could have buyback centers. After these materials are being collected, they could actually be taken to places where you can go and buy those recyclables back and take them, put them to good use. And of course, penalties and fines should be put on those that dump waste indiscriminately. Those that just dump their waste on river channels, when they know that there's a punishment for that, that actually reduces the possibility or the emergence of improper waste disposal within the metropolis. We could also have community participation and introduction of incentives. So the community actually has to be a part of the process. When you say pay as you throw, it's simply saying the more waste you generate and you throw out, the more money you pay. And people would be people would not want to do that, because they know that the more waste they generate, the more money they have to pay. So in order to spend less on waste, they actually recycle a lot of things that are recyclable within their households, instead of just throwing them out just because they can. So now that they're being charged for it, they decide, okay, let's keep these bottles. We can actually use them for other purposes. And then they know the purposes for which it is safe to use. You can have deposit refund schemes where you go buy certain things in containers. When you finish using them, you take the containers back to these people, and then the money that you paid upfront before you bought will be given back to you. So that actually encourages you to keep taking back these containers where they can be recycled. And then you can have rewards as well, and vouchers. So for households and individuals that take on the best recycling practices, from the point of generation, they sort out waste and separate them in a way that is easy for the recycling companies to use, or people involved in recycling to use. Those that have best recycling practices could actually be given cash prizes. They could be given gifts or vouchers to buy certain materials. When you have all of this, that actually encourages people to engage in competition of recycling, and that reduces the level of waste in circulation. So this basically is what I have for today, and this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Umul Khair. Interesting presentation. I was looking forward to this one. And I see no comments in the chat. So just a few things. What was interesting is that you talked about how, waste pickers kind of their activity leads to kind of an upcycling of waste. And actually, it's private. So far, it has been private sector controlled, which led to a co-creation of new industries, right? So through this process of various role players, including the most vulnerable people, there was access to certain kinds of economic gain. However, there were risks and challenges associated with that when you talk about toxic waste and all that. So you also mentioned about awareness, of these things.
Yes.
However, so what I looked at there was that co-creation of industries because of that relationship between markets that are available for waste pickers to take their products to transform them into other goods for sale, meant there was kind of access to the economic potential of a city, right? So it's looking at, I was trying to find the spatial kind of justice link there. But you also spoke then about government interventions and community participation, which then I linked and looked back at how do these things support the co-creation of these industries and the waste pickers earning something or their earning potential, or does it compromise it? Because from what you presented in the end, I thought that the strategies of now educating households on how to deal with their waste and recycling them. What's the impact of that on the waste pickers who have created a kind of source of income for themselves? Can you answer that question, please? Thank you.
Yes. So I think basically the waste pickers into the entire thing, because they would still be involved in the process of recycling, they would just have better means of doing it. So if you're going to households, you have a certain process of doing it, or they could go to the drop-off centers. They are the ones to collect from, since we do not have all of these facilities put in the first place. So we're just starting out small. So they're still going to be very much part of the process. They're not going to be sidelined in such a way that everybody has a role to play, but then we know the people that are responsible for it. It's not just done in such a way that it doesn't benefit, because the amounts that they actually generate from waste picking is very meager in terms of what could be realized if recycling is being expanded to a level where it's supposed to generate revenue for the state. We would even need more of them because there is more waste to collect in ways that are efficient, ways that are safe. Right now, you see some of them on dump sites. Some of them get injured. Some of them they don't have anybody protecting their interests. So while they get meager amounts for that, it still poses a lot of risks to them. So it is better if they're incorporated in such a way that they can actually benefit in a way that is safe for them.
Okay, so the next question related, thanks for that response. Are there any initiatives to kind of create, I think you hinted on it, but I just need clarity on creating some kind of organizations of the waste pickers themselves to engage with how they involved in this kind of policy making and the government intervention and community participation? Are they included in that, or is it top down?
Sorry, please, can you come again?
I was asking about, the government and community interventions and policy changes, etc. Are the waste pickers involved in that process or not?
Well, the whole aim of this is to get recycling companies to be able to recycle within town. So when you have that and you have all of these policies, even if the waste pickers do not get to pick waste, then they get to be part of these companies, part of the crushing process, part of the packaging process. There will be certainly something for them. Even if they do not pick waste, there will be something for them. So they'll definitely be incorporated in it.
Okay, so we're not sure at the moment whether they're being, whether the waste pickers themselves are being included in the process of those decisions that are being made by government or community organizations. Is that clear or not so clear at the moment?
It's not so clear at the moment because the government here is not even involved, is not considering it yet. We're just advising, we're just saying you can actually do this. So they're not considering it yet, so we don't know what. But then if we're still advising when they're considering it, then they would be part of the process. Okay,
now so I'm just looking at the theme of this room, which is spatial justice, and which comes from socioeconomic justice as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this work pans out as well, and what the government interventions are and community initiatives. But I think your presentation as well raised some very interesting issues for us to consider here as well. So thank you very much. I know you had a challenge there with storms and things, which you informed me of. So I'm glad that we could hear you mostly clearly. There was minimal interference. So thank you very much, Khair. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Okay, so very interesting two presentations that we looked at now before now. I still don't see, and maybe Nompumelelo, if you can help me locate the other two presenters. I still don't see Oluwagbemi and Michael.
Thank you, Doc. I also am not seeing them in the group.
Yeah. Sorry, Prof. Midaishi Samos. Let me just bring this to your, yes. Let me just bring this to your notice. Oluwagbemi actually was going to travel to Canada from Nigeria, so we gave him the chance to present yesterday. So
okay.
He's already presented, so we can move on.
Thank you. And yes, the other presenter, Michael Oluwafemi, Joel?
Yes, well, I wouldn't know why that presenter is not here, but maybe we can just conclude, sir.
Yeah, I was thinking as well, if there are no general comments in addition to what we've spoken about, I want to thank the speakers, and I hope the comments that or the questions I asked and the comments I gave you, it was meant to actually, because I'm interested in your work, you know, that I made those comments. They're not critical comments, but they are worthy of maybe enriching the work you've done. I thank you all for attending this very important session, and also to Nompu for, you know, the co-hosting, and you been doing background work in timekeeping and all that, so that's very much appreciated as well. And also the organizers, Medease, and I think you've done a wonderful job in communicating with us all, and thank you to the team.
Thank you very much.
So we'll see you all tomorrow in the plenary session as well. Do enjoy your day, and I hope you reflect on what we discussed today. So thank you and bye.
Thank you.